Ethan had always preferred the quiet. On his small farm on the edge of human settlement, life moved slowly, marked by the rhythm of his own hands and the occasional hum of distant machinery. After years of skirmishes with alien forces and the loss of his family in a conflict that had changed the galaxy, he found solace in routine, in the comfort of knowing that each day could be predictable. But that night the predictability shattered. It began with the wind. A strange, almost unnatural howl slipped through the cracks of his small house, rattling the windows and stirring a sense of unease in his chest. Ethan rose from his chair by the fireplace, rubbing his tired eyes. It was late, and the storm had begun with a sudden fury, rain lashing against the roof. Normally, it was just the farm animals that caused disturbances during such storms, but this sound, it was different, a soft scratching followed by a faint thud. Ethan's hand instinctively went to the rifle hanging on the wall, though he didn't expect to use it. The noise repeated, accompanied by soft whimpers. Whoever or whatever was outside, it was in trouble. Cautiously, Ethan approached the door, each step measured and deliberate. He opened it just a crack, peering into the shadows beyond the flickering light of his porch lamp. The rain made it hard to see, the night a dark blur, but there, through the curtain of water, he saw a figure. She was unlike any alien he had seen in person, towering over him with dark-scaled skin that gleamed wetly in the storm. She leaned heavily against the wall of his house. At her feet, two small children clung to her legs, shivering violently. Their eyes, wide and uncertain, reflected the faint light of the storm, and Ethan's chest tightened. He stepped back, heart racing. His mind screamed caution. Valari. That was what they were called. A reptilian species humans had fought bitterly years ago. Fear and instinct warred with compassion in his mind. The adult figure lifted her head, revealing sharp, angular features softened by exhaustion. She spoke in broken human language, her voice hoarse. Widow. Hunted. Help. Ethan blinked. Her words were simple, fragmented, but the meaning was clear. She was asking for shelter. She was asking for protection. And despite the war that had once put humans and Valari at odds, something in her eyes reminded him that not all of them were enemies. He hesitated, weighing his options. Leaving them outside meant death or capture for her and her children. Bringing them in meant breaking his own rule of isolation, risking danger. But the sound of the children shivering, the vulnerability of the creature before him, left no room for hesitation. Come inside, and he said finally, his voice rough but steady. The relief on her face was immediate. She shifted, slowly letting herself collapse onto the threshold. Ethan stepped aside, allowing her to enter. The children followed, hesitant, dragging their small limbs through the muddy ground. Ethan quickly grabbed blankets and wrapped them around the little ones, murmuring soft reassurances. Their tiny hands clutched at the warmth, faces pressed into the fabric. Sora, the alien widow, sank to the floor, exhausted. Ethan knelt nearby, unsure how much he could do for her. She spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. Syndicate. Raiders want. Children. The words were simple, but the meaning was horrifying. Someone was hunting them for profit, for exploitation. She had no one else to turn to. Ethan's mind flashed back to the wars he had fought, to the betrayals and losses. He had expected enemies to be faceless, to be monsters without nuance, but here was proof that not all Valari were his enemy. Some were victims, just like him. He prepared a warm meal, feeding the children first. They ate slowly, shyly, but greedily. Sora watched, weak but grateful, her hands resting lightly on her children's shoulders. Ethan noticed the care in her gaze, the way she kept checking to make sure they were fed and safe. Despite the scars, despite the past, there was still a family here, clinging to one another. Night deepened, but sleep did not come easily. Ethan kept glancing toward the window, toward the shadows beyond. He had a sinking feeling that the storm might not be the only threat tonight. His instincts were correct. Hours later, he saw movement. Faint figures crossing the field outside, cloaked in darkness, moving with purpose. The Syndicate raiders had tracked them, and they were coming. Sora stirred, sensing the tension. She rose slowly, brushing water from her shoulders. Her eyes met Ethan's, sharp and calculating despite her exhaustion. Danger comes, she said simply. Ethan nodded, understanding immediately. These were not ordinary criminals. They were organized, skilled, and ruthless. He spent the next hours preparing. He set traps around the perimeter, old machinery parts and tools repurposed into defensive devices. He checked the doors and windows, ensuring everything was as secure as possible. Sora helped where she could, her movements cautious but deliberate. Even in her weakened state, there was a strength about her, a resolve that commanded respect. As the storm raged outside, the human and the alien shared a tense silence. Sora kneeled near her children, murmuring soft sounds in her native tongue. Ethan watched, feeling a mixture of awe and responsibility. He realized something profound. For all the hatred and mistrust that had divided their species, here was a moment of pure humanity. Compassion, care, protection, these things transcended species. Hours passed. The first light of dawn was still far away, and yet the tension outside had grown. Shadows moved with more purpose now, and Ethan could see the faint glint of weapons. He knew the raiders were close. Sora stood, straightening despite her fatigue. She approached Ethan and placed her hand over her chest in a gesture he did not fully understand, but the meaning was clear. It was an oath, a promise. "I protect your home, but my children safe," she said, her voice steady. It was not a plea. It was an offer of loyalty. Ethan studied her carefully. The words, the posture, the fierce protective instinct, he recognized the truth. She was offering everything she had to ensure her children's survival, and in return she asked only for safety. There was no manipulation here, no hidden agenda, just a raw and desperate need to protect her family. He nodded, silently acknowledging the bond forming between them. In a world that had taught him to expect betrayal, it was a strange and almost disorienting feeling to encounter pure trust. The raiders were approaching fast now. Their shouts were muffled by the storm, but the tension was unmistakable. Ethan handed Sora a simple blade, a farming tool sharpened for defense. She took it without hesitation, eyes narrowing as she assessed the threats outside. The children watched from a corner, huddled together but not afraid, sensing the presence of someone willing to fight for them. The first figures appeared at the edge of the farm, their movements confident and predatory. Ethan and Sora took their positions, ready to defend the small home and the fragile family within. Traps were set, barriers reinforced, and every inch of the perimeter was prepared for the coming confrontation. As the raiders advanced, Sora and Ethan exchanged a brief look. There was no need for words. Their understanding was complete. They were no longer human and alien divided by fear. They were allies, protectors of life in its most vulnerable form. The night stretched on, the storm a relentless companion. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but amidst the fear and the tension, he felt something he had not felt in years. Purpose. Not just survival, but responsibility, connection, and a chance to do something meaningful again. And as the first shadow of the raiders approached the edge of the property, Ethan tightened his grip on his weapon, ready to face whatever came. Behind him, Sora stood like a guardian, her children clinging close, and together they waited. For the first time in a long time, Ethan did not feel alone. And for Soraya, the human's home, his willingness to help, was the first true sanctuary she had known since the attack that had taken her husband and almost her life. In the quiet tension of that stormy night, two worlds collided, not with conflict but with hope, and the bond that would shape the future began to form. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon when the raiders reached the edge of Ethan's farm. Rain still streaked the ground, leaving puddles and mud that reflected the gray sky. The air was thick with tension. Every movement seemed louder, every shadow sharper. Ethan crouched behind a barricade of farm tools and stacked crates, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on him. Sora knelt nearby, her blade in one hand, her eyes scanning the approaching figures. She did not speak, but her presence was commanding. A silent promise that she would fight with everything she had to protect her children and the human who had offered them shelter. The children watched from the corner of the barn, huddled together, their wide eyes tracking every movement. They were quiet, but they sensed the urgency in the air. Despite their fear, there was trust. Trust in Ethan and Soraya. Trust that these two figures would keep them safe from the hunters who had caused them so much pain. The raiders were close now, enough that Ethan could hear their muffled voices and the click of their weapons. They moved confidently, unaware that their target had not just a human home, but a human defender who knew his land and an alien warrior with a strength and strategy that belied her exhaustion. Ethan whispered to Soraya, "Ready?" She nodded once, her eyes sharp. "Always." Then, without warning, the first raider stepped into a trap Ethan had set, a simple mechanism rigged with a net and a weighted beam. The man yelped as the trap lifted him off the ground, leaving him dangling helplessly. It was enough to cause confusion among the others, and Soraya used the moment to step forward. Her movements were swift, precise, almost graceful. She wielded the farming blade with deadly accuracy, disarming one raider before he could even draw his weapon fully. Ethan took advantage of the chaos, firing his rifle carefully, aiming to disable without unnecessary harm. The raiders had expected an easy attack. They did not expect coordinated defense from a human and an alien working together. The battle was tense. Mud and rain mixed with the metallic clang of weapons echoing across the farm. Ethan realized that this fight was not just for survival. It was for trust, for honor, for the fragile bond that had formed overnight between him, Soraya, and her children. Every movement he made was deliberate. Every choice mattered. Soraya's presence was inspiring. Even as fatigue threatened to slow her, she remained vigilant, shielding the children from sight, striking when necessary, retreating when needed, always moving with the precision of someone who had fought countless battles in her own world. She did not speak much, but her eyes communicated everything: strength, focus, and determination. One of the raiders attempted to flank them through a side path, thinking the storm and darkness gave him an advantage. Soraya noticed immediately. She moved silently, her feet barely making a sound in the mud. With a swift, controlled motion, she blocked his advance, forcing him back toward Ethan's traps. Within moments, the raider was ensnared, struggling against a snare trap Ethan had prepared. Ethan glanced at her, a mixture of admiration and relief filling him. This alien, this creature he had once feared, was fighting not just for herself or her children, but for him as well. It was a partnership he had never expected, and yet it felt natural. Hours passed, though the battle seemed like only minutes. The raiders realized that brute force alone would not win this fight. Their numbers were higher, but the defense was stronger. Ethan and Soraya moved with a rhythm that was almost instinctive, anticipating each other's actions, covering blind spots, and keeping the children safe. Finally, as the sun began to rise, the raiders realized they could not win. They retreated, grumbling threats and promises of revenge, but they left the farm intact. Ethan sank to the ground, exhausted, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. Soraya joined him, lowering her blade and breathing heavily. Her children ran to her, wrapping themselves around her legs. The three of them huddled together, relieved but wary. Ethan looked at Soraya, noticing the small cuts on her skin, the bruises forming from exhaustion. Despite the fight, despite the danger, she smiled faintly. It was not a full smile, but it was enough to show gratitude and trust. "Your children are safe," he said simply. "They are my life," she replied softly. Her voice held something Ethan could not name. Respect, perhaps, or gratitude, or maybe a recognition that they were no longer enemies. "And I will protect yours too," she added, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. The day after the attack was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sun that warmed the muddy earth. Ethan and Soraya worked side by side to repair the damage to the farm, their movements synchronized from the previous night's battle. The children helped where they could, carrying small bundles of tools or fetching water. Despite the challenges, there was a sense of normalcy returning. Ethan found himself talking to Soraya, learning more about her life, her world, and the people she had lost. She spoke carefully, her words chosen with precision, but they revealed a history of strength, resilience, and courage. Ethan shared some of his own experiences, though he was more guarded. Trust had to be earned, and he was cautious, even as he felt it growing between them. By evening, they had completed most of the repairs. The farm, though muddy and worn, stood ready to face whatever came next. Soraya watched the sun set, her children playing nearby, and then turned to Ethan. She lowered her gaze slightly and spoke quietly. "I will share your bed, human. Just ensure my children survive." Ethan blinked, understanding the meaning behind her words. This was not a request for romance or intimacy. It was a Valari tradition, a vow of loyalty and protection. She was offering herself, her skills, and her strength in exchange for the safety of her children and a chance to survive. It was an honor, not a burden, He nodded solemnly. Then we face this together, he said. His words were simple, but they carried weight. Together meant they would protect each other, fight side by side, and care for the children as if they were all part of one family. The following days were filled with preparation and training. Ethan taught Sora the layout of the farm, the hidden traps, and the defensive positions. Sora, in turn, trained Ethan in basic Velari combat techniques, showing him how to anticipate an opponent's movements and react with precision. The children watched eagerly, learning from both of them, their laughter bringing life back to the once quiet farm. Word of the fight spread through the village. Initially, some humans were wary of a Velari living among them, but the story of Ethan and Sora's defense changed perceptions. Courage, after all, was respected regardless of species. The villagers began to offer small gifts, assistance, and even protection, recognizing that the union of human and alien, bonded by trust and honor, was something extraordinary. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Ethan and Sora sat outside watching the children play. The air was calm, filled with the sense of wet earth and fresh grass. Sora leaned back, letting the quiet moments wash over her. For the first time since the loss of her husband, she felt a sense of safety, a fragile hope that perhaps the future could be better. Ethan watched her from the side, noticing the small ways she relaxed, the trust she now placed in him. He realized that this connection, forged in the heat of battle and the shared responsibility for her children, was rare and powerful. It was not love in the traditional sense, but it was something just as significant: respect, trust, and mutual reliance. As night fell, the family gathered inside the house. Ethan set up sleeping arrangements, ensuring the children were comfortable and warm. Sora placed herself close to them, vigilant even in rest. Ethan lay nearby, awake for a while, thinking about the events of the past days. The world was vast and unpredictable, filled with dangers both known and unseen. Yet here, in this small human settlement, a bond had formed that could withstand anything. The raid had been defeated, but life would continue to test them. Ethan knew that threats would come again, that the galaxy was not forgiving. But he also knew that with Sora by his side, with the children growing under their protection, they had a chance to face the future with courage. In the quiet of the night, Ethan realized something profound. The galaxy had taught him fear, loss, and mistrust, but it had also taught him that strength was not just in weapons or numbers, but in loyalty, trust, and the willingness to protect those who could not protect themselves. Sora and her children were no longer strangers, they were family. And family was worth fighting for no matter the cost. Sora whispered to Ethan before sleep, her voice soft but firm. We do not forget. We protect. We survive. Together. Ethan nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. Together, he echoed. And in that simple word, a new chapter began. A chapter of courage, trust, and hope. A chapter where a human and an alien widow, bound by the responsibility to protect children and life itself, faced the future side by side, ready for whatever challenges awaited them.